Hi scholars, it's Dr. Kennedy. I'm going to review Module 5 out of Critical Thinking About Social Problems. And Module 5 addresses crime and violence. And as we're studying some of the social issues within the topic, it's important to get a foundation of some of the language, terminology that we use when we're talking about deviant behavior. So the module opens up discussing what deviant behavior is. In other words, breaking the rules, transgressing from the norms. That means not following along with the either the formal rules we create in society, which is the laws, or the informal rules that are things like manners or moral, ethical obligations that we have to each other, but may not necessarily be written down through or documented in a formal process like a policy or procedure. And so what we do in society is we try to encourage people to follow the rules. It's kind of a method of social control if you want to think of it in that framework. It's important that we all follow some rules because we live in this society together. We've got to live and work together. And so we have to make sure that how we live our lives is not inflicting or harming others. And because we are social beings, but we are conscious beings, we're able to understand that connection between our interactions and what means harm versus our interactions and what means peace and love and those kinds of aspects. So because we have the ability to critically think and we are conscious beings that we can process these thoughts and understand the difference between right and wrong, we expect each other to follow certain rules so that society can work and function. And the ways that we do that is we create sanctions. So when we're trying to make sure someone doesn't do a specific behavior, we'll end up putting some type of punishment associated with that, whether it be in the workplace or even informally at home, how we communicate with each other, with those that we live with. We put rules on how we're supposed to speak to each other, conduct ourselves. But it also happens formally. We have laws that say there's certain things that you can and can't do in regards to your interactions with other people. So we have negative sanctions, but we also have positive sanctions. So society also rewards good behavior and when you're doing things right. And sometimes it's to still persuade people to follow the rules. And so we'll provide these rewards even if it's verbally, that yes, you're doing the right thing, you're acting the right way, you're thinking the right way. So the module starts with an introduction, a little bit about that, and it goes into the different types of deviant behavior as far as why people break the rules, some basic understanding of what the influences are, and they're basically categorized into 3 categories, and you'll see them on page 81. So it's the first page of the module. And the 3 are statistical, moralistic, and then the last one is the medical, social, pathological. So the statistical is really looking at the average, making sure that people are following the norm. And so we have like a benchmark, a standard. So statistically, whether you're not following that standard of what is accepted in society and the expectations of society, then that would be statistical deviance. Whether you're outside of that norm, you're an outlier, those kinds of things. So it looks at it in a very statistical, numeric way of computing what deviance exists and why it might exist based on population, number of incidences, things like that. The other category is moralistic. This one is probably one that we're most associated with. We hear that terminology a lot as far as what ethics we must abide by as humans, as people coexisting together. So we're constantly taught what is appropriate and inappropriate behavior. So the moralistic view looks at that, our morals, our values, our core values, and how those are expressed and what we all agree to respect within those values, but then also what our social values are together as a group, as a collective. And then the last is the pathological. This is where something is internal. You may not have the internal processes or regulators to help regulate behavior. We see this a lot when we give the medical diagnosis of a sociopath. People are unable to understand empathy. They can understand an act is wrong. They understand what you're saying, but to feel internally why it would be wrong, what the pain is associated with that, because some individuals, pain is pleasure. So we're talking about those kinds of diagnoses that find something biological, physiological within you that may cause you to break the rules or have the inability to follow the rules. Then we get more into the social aspects, the social foundation of deviance within sociology. And we have a different, I would say, a more narrow understanding of deviance, what it is, how it's defined, and then why it occurs in society. A little bit different than you'll see on the common ways of categorizing deviance based on the statistical, moral, and pathological. Sociologists then look at three other aspects that we call the social foundation of deviance. We look at relativity, how deviance is different based on the social population. So it could be different based on region, geography, or any other identity factors. So what is appropriate behavior in one part of the world might be inappropriate in another. The informal rules might be different. Like in some countries, it's publicly acceptable to pick your ears or pick your nose, but in other parts of the world, it's not. So things like that, how deviance is relative. And that's something sociologists consider, along with the statistical, moral, and pathological, but sociologists look at the external factors outside of us and how those external factors define what is deviant behavior, appropriate or inappropriate behavior. And so relativity is one. The other is how we label and how labeling affects individuals. So the only reason somebody is considered deviant is because societies deem them deviant. So they've given that person that label. And once we give someone that label, it kind of becomes part of their identity and who they are, not just to society, but to themselves, because that label causes a stigma, which is an internal psychological process that affects us and how we view, ourselves and how understanding how other people see us in the world. And so sociologists also look at that also you can do something deviant, but society doesn't consider it deviant. Either something changed in society, or it's not normal, but it's not taboo. So there's no restrictions on that type of behavior. You can look at things now, like historically in the past, if somebody had tattoos 50 years ago, that was considered a deviant marker. You were, associated with certain groups in society, and those groups, meant danger, cautious, things like that. But today, tattoos are like part of pop culture, so everyone has them, expresses them. So even though you're doing something deviant, it's not part of the norm. Not everyone in society does it and finds it acceptable, but society doesn't label you deviant anymore like they would have maybe 50 years ago.